So it had a little technical difficulty going on there for a second, but I think I just sent you the link also as well inside your messenger, brother, so you can share that out to your community and whatnot.
Okay.
Have to go back in and reset some things and whatnot. So you should be all good now. You got it?
Yeah, I got it. Let me send this to people right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take another minute or so. Sorry, folks out there that are still waiting. I see the young lady in there waiting, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Technology, right? But we got a lot of good information to talk about tonight. Check in. Share, please share. And we'll get started in approximately 1 more minute. So we're getting going, man. I know you're a busy man, and I don't want to keep you all night, man. I could. That last conversation we had, we could talk about that just alone all night. But I know you got other things to do, and I appreciate your time and energy. So first of all, let me welcome everybody out there to season 3. This is season 3 of Please Educate All Children Equally's Manhood Mondays. And tonight, we have a great, awesome, and amazing guest. I want to say doctor, it just kind of rolls off my tongue yet, but I know you're not quite there yet, but pretty soon you'll be there. So we're just going to say soon to be the Dr. Andre Taylor. How you doing, good brother?
I'm doing well, you?
Hey, man, I can't complain, man. Every day above ground is a great day. Every day above ground is a great day. So, what's good with you? What's going on?
Nothing much, just getting ready to start classes, heading back into my last year of classwork for PhD at William and Mary. Still working full-time at William and Mary as the campus oral historian. Sent my kids back to school for 2nd grade today. So I'm living a good life right now.
Hey man, that's a beautiful thing, man. So let's go back to that a little bit. Let's talk about that. Awesome having how many kids you got?
2 twin girls.
Man, that's a blessing, man. That's a blessing. That's truly a blessing. So let's go back to the beginning a little bit. Let's go back to Philadelphia, right? And talk about that a little bit. Coming out of Philadelphia, I don't want to give it all away. I know some of it, but I'll let you. That's why I got you here. Talk about that a little bit. Coming up in Philadelphia.
Oh man, Philly. To this day, I'm still Philly, no matter where I move to. And I've lived in 10 other states in the District of Columbia. And no matter where I go, I still walk like I'm from Philly. I talk like I'm from Philly. And I move like I'm from Philly. And a lot of people take offense to that, because they're not ready for a person that's just going to come to, I don't deal with email and text message. If you have something you want to talk to me about, I'm coming to your office. And people don't know how to handle that. And I'm learning that within certain spaces, they get offended because here's the big black guy coming into my office. And, I haven't heard it yet this year. But then again, classes don't officially start until Wednesday. But, I've heard you're intimidating. Why am I? Well, your size. Okay. Size is something, and football has taught me this. You can't coach size.
Right.
You can't teach size. This is just who I am. And I'm not going to change that. But I think it ultimately is, honestly, in my opinion, it's an intellect issue. Individuals who look at me and they think, oh, here comes this black guy with a hoodie on. And then when I start talking, it's like, dang, he knows too much. So I think that Philly has given me a great foundation to move forward, because people talk about history. When we start thinking about documents that govern this nation, the origin is Philly.
Facts. All facts. So, football is how we met years ago. Talk about, that energy or that community a little bit, and then what you did with that, maybe poster, and how did that have an impact on you? That
Oh man.
culture.
So I got to give it up to Coach Hill over at Ben Franklin. Coach Hill has and always will be at the center of everything that I do. Like Coach Hill, for a lot of people, like, Coach Hill coached my dad in Little League track, coached two of my uncles in football, coached me in football, then coached one of my little brothers in football. So Coach Hill is not coach. Coach Hill is family.
Right. Absolutely.
And I
Shout out to
remember
Coach Hill. I haven't heard that name in a while. Wow.
Coach Hill gave me an opportunity at Ben Franklin High School to try out for the varsity football team as a freshman. We didn't have JV, and he was like one of my biggest supporters. And I made varsity, and I'm just like, all right, I'm good stuff, and I'm big time. And then you start hearing names like Chaffee Fields at Mass Bomb and a couple other cats. But it was one person, I'll never forget. I saw one person play, and he became my all-time greatest football player. And that's Julian Graham.
Shout out to my young boy. Oh my God. That's my heart. That's my heart first and foremost. So you know that was the first team I ever coached in 1991 when he was on JV.
Mm-hmm.
That's my first team I ever coached. Yep.
So we had a Thursday game and Bartram had a Friday game. And I left school early so I could go see this guy play. And I'm like, that guy is tough. I want to be like him. Right. And I'll never forget, it was Julian Graham, Raheem Stevenson. We were sitting at a table together at this event, and Julian was so approachable. I'm like, yo, this dude is like, do I ask for an autograph or not? And I remember the All-Star game that he played in. Pass goes across the middle. He backs up in the coverage, jumps up, one hand interception, and runs the other way. And I'm like, that guy he's elite. So he went to Pitt. And it's funny because I was like, yo, I might want to be a Pitt Panther. I used to go out to his games as a recruit and get the free tickets. And I would stay with my aunt who lived out in Pittsburgh. And then before I knew it, I started having people come and recruit me, and football was one thing that was fun for me. And I wanted somebody else to pay for me to ultimately become a journalist. And I spent 15 years as a journalist. So football didn't work out at Temple where I went. But it opened that door and let me realize that, hey, this is definitely where I want to be. Football is fine, but I definitely want to be in journalism. And that took me to Cheney, where I was in charge of the school newspaper for 3 years.
That's what it was. I knew, I couldn't remember the affiliation, but I knew you were there doing something around sports. There you go, or something.
I went there to go play ball, and that didn't work out. So I stuck with it. I was like, you know what? Journalism is going to be my thing. And Cheney, up until the end, provided that, like I was all in on Cheney until Cheney wasn't all in on me. And I left Cheney with 9 credits short of a degree. And ended up going into my profession because the profession was like, well, look, we see the stuff you're doing. Why don't you come do this? And I wrote for some pretty big newspapers in the country. I was in New York City writing for Newsday, which is a larger paper up there. I've been at the Hartford Courant, which is the oldest continuously published newspaper in the country. So I had a chance to go to some different places and enjoy myself as a journalist. And it wasn't until I got to Greensboro, North Carolina, I'll never forget, I told my wife, I said, I want a degree. And she said, all right, well, go get it. So I transfer all my credits from Cheney and Temple to North Carolina A&T. And that's where Coach Hill went. So I was like, all right, if it worked for him, it's going to work for me. You're talking about a guy who played ball with Jesse Jackson. So Coach Hill is always going to be up there for me. And I never forget getting in, and all of a sudden, my wife finds out that she's pregnant. So my kids were born at the end of my first semester at A&T. And I was like, you know what, I got to keep pushing, and graduated from A&T. And then I just had that bug, and I went directly from A&T to North Carolina State for my master's, graduated with my master's, and ended up working at William and Mary. And I never forget my director, he said, you should be teaching. And I said, well, I want to teach. And he said, well, what do you need? I said, I need a PhD, but that's not in the cards for me right now. I don't have the money. And he said, you work for William and Mary. We pay for you to get a PhD. And I said, oh, well, if that's the case then.
Right, right, right.
So it became this thing of having somebody else pay for you to get to where you want to be. Because I didn't pay for grad school at NC State. I didn't pay for the finish up at A&T. So now it's just like this trajectory of going through to get higher education for nothing. So now that I'm getting it, I'm like, all right, I got to take this education back to the people and give it to the people who gave to me. That's why I'm here now.
Right, right. Would you consider that? Actually, it's me and my wife actually had this conversation not so long ago. Consider that part of our reparations? Partially, a little bit?
Nah. I mean, reparation comes in many forms, but it's just like, why am I receiving the reparations if nobody else is? So only the elite can. So now we're going back to this whole talented 10 situation where only 10% of us are the educated and the people who are going to move forward. We're the ones who are deriving the plan, not the ones who are implementing the plan. So the people who implement don't get a chance to get a piece of the pie because, oh, that's right, you're not educated. So I can't say that this is reparations because everybody isn't getting it.
True. And that was part of the conversation and whatnot. I guess for some it isn't, but in mass we're not. But that's another conversation for a whole nother night. I'm just curious when you said all that, because I just recently had that conversation. So oral historian, what is that?
I get to give life to the people who never had a voice. When we read a history book, it's very one-dimensional. John F. Kennedy was shot on this day at this angle and closed. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on this day and closed. Kwame Ture was shot at, and this happened. So you see all this is very one-dimensional, and it's done that way specifically in history books to exclude people's voices, because now you're going to give a different vantage point. It's just like with a crime report. How many witnesses do you have? How many different angles do you have? We have multiple angles. We have to talk to everybody to get the full narrative. So the oral historian, what I do is I come in and find the people that are associated with these historical narratives. And I make sure that these individuals get a voice now. Like, for instance, when I say Martin Luther King Jr., and, this is, a couple of days after the March on Washington, but Martin Luther King Jr., everybody thinks of him as the person in front of the march, the person at the front of the protest, the person in the jail writing letters. But how many people know Martin to actually just pop up in a church to go to church one day? Nobody knows that. We only know him as this person in the front. So he came to Williamsburg and went to a historically Black church and just sat in the pews. He wasn't at the front. A lot of people didn't know he was coming. He just popped up. So now we get to see Martin as a parishioner, Martin as just an individual, an everyday person. Oral historians get to give that narrative because we can't talk to him about it. His kids weren't with him, but the people who were there who got him his water and escort him to his seat, they're still alive. So I got to talk to them to find out, what was he like? Tell me why did he show up at this church? Well, we're one of the first Black churches in the South, blah, blah, blah. And he came in and we asked if he wanted to go up to the front to meet the pastor. He said, I just want to sit down. My feet are tired. And it's just like, wow, this man found refuge in Williamsburg, Virginia, where all he wanted to do is hear the word. So my job now is to add that to his narrative. So the history books say Martin did this, and I get to say, well, Martin also did this, 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 and this. So let's go ahead and elaborate on that. A lot of people don't know about his connection with Chester Seminary in Pennsylvania. I know about that. The Penn School in South Carolina, which was started in 1837, 1862 is when it was liberated. But these are all, and you see the 1837 connection because this is when a lot of Quakers left Philadelphia to the South to educate Black folks. So these narratives go untold if we don't find the people to tell these stories. So as the oral historian, that's what I get to do. I get paid to find history.
Heavy. So people out there, young people, listen, parents, if you have a child that has that sort of gift or aspiration or whatnot, is a role model right here who's doing the work, right? And it's another career, another something else to do. And with all the things going on, so you got people out there now I guess, what do you think about social media? I'm gonna deviate a little bit. What do you think about social media and the TikToks and this and that, and everybody becoming an expert at these things, but they're not researching per se, right? Maybe some are, but I don't think many of them are. Talk about that a little bit. Good, bad, ugly, in your opinion.
So the good part is you get people thinking. You know, the moment you have people having the wheels spin, I'm all for that. And the problem I have is when you have people that are spitting these untruths. Like, we already have enough untruths out there about us. When I was in grad school at North Carolina State, I specifically studied climatology as it's concerning African Americans in South Carolina. So my senior project was the impacts of climate change and sea level rise on coastal communities of color, where I was specifically looking at how the Gullah Geechee community can continue their cultural heritage through their food waste. You know, so how are they able to raise the food that they had done since their arrival here as enslaved people? And now you have some people that are saying some things, well, the rice really came from here. This is where the rice, and I'm like, my history tells me so-and-so. Just because your grandmom said it's true, don't mean that it's true. You know, because some people say, oh, well, you know, my grandma said peaches came from Georgia. That is very cute. You know, I appreciate you thinking that it came from Georgia, but it doesn't. So I like the fact that people are getting involved and finding their voice on social media. However, make sure your voice has validity, because otherwise you're doing nothing but burying us further, you know, under these mounds of nothingness. And it gives people like Ron DeSantis the power he needs to make us sound like we know nothing.
Yeah. That particular name, was one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, right? I'll be honest with you. Not just him, but but all the things that highlight being on that. And shout out to the alphas. Shout out to the alphas, right?
Well, now,
because shout out to the alphas, man. This is Alpha and Omega, but I'm gonna say shout out to the alphas because y'all said you're not doing your conference down there.
Yeah.
Y'all came out and said that. My organization hasn't said that yet. So we'll see. And I'm gonna, talk bad about them because I'm not gonna do that. But different levels of politics and so on and so forth, I get all that. But shout out to y'all, man, for stepping up and saying, no, we ain't doing that.
I was so proud because that happened. The announcement came at our general convention in Dallas. And I was like, man, this is really happening. Like, and I'm there as a delegate and I'm voting. Like, it's like, yo, this is amazing. Like, it's going back to those moments in history. Like, this is going to be a turning point because the financial impact in Florida in that area was going to be $4.6 million. If you know anything about Florida, it's a tourist state. So how is the school system funded? It's funded through tourism. So $4.6 million is a hit to somebody's school district. And the fact that we said we're not going to do it, that threw light on there. Then NSBE followed suit and did that. And the cool part is the piece is coming out soon. I don't know when, but I got the co-author Alpha's response to Ron DeSantis. So I'll let you know when that comes out.
Please do.
And it's based on historical research that I've done where we're looking at when he said, well, he didn't say it. His people said it and he just echoed it. But the fact that we didn't learn, we had to be taught to do things and we benefited. No, we knew what we were doing. That's why we were in high demand. That's why we were sought after. Okay. Because going back to my specialty, which is rice, the rice culture in the South, you went and you took us from West Africa, Sierra Leone, Togo, Benin, Angola, and brought us here because as you were making your trips back and forth, you see these ditches of people flooding fields. And that's engineering when we start thinking about that. Like you're creating a field with no pipes, no mechanical usage, but you found a way to do it. You have brackish water that is now being turned into fresh water to flood these fields because too much salt would over inundate the fields and make sure that nothing grew. It decimates the land. So you see these individuals that have this knowledge and you say, all right, this is how we're going to corner the Western hemisphere with the rice culture. Because before they were sailing around the tip of Africa, going over to Asia to get rice, not realizing that the rice that they wanted was right there. And you had, if you look at South Carolina and West Africa, look at the topography, they mimic each other.
Right.
You put the maps together, they fit. So therefore you're looking at similar types of land. The heat is going to be about the same. The water temperature is going to be about the same. The pH in the soil is going to be about the same. And even if it's not, those people know how to fix it and make it equal so we can still grow. So that's how the rice culture begins in this country in 1650, 1650 to about 1825.
Mm.
And it's just like you have all these enslaved people coming. And the cool part is when we start thinking about indigenous people, you have to include the Gullah Geechee community in that, because they didn't come here as Gullah Geechee. They came here as people from Benin, Angola, Sierra Leone.
Right.
They realized that they had a common use in this country. They were growing rice. How are we going to talk to each other? We need a way of communication. Gullah Geechee language starts. And all of a sudden, what you're seeing is this rice culture that came. You start seeing okra. You start seeing certain types of melon, because enslaved women were taking the seeds and braiding their hair and bringing it here. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew that they had to eat. So this is how you see the introduction of certain things into what is now the American food identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say that, we benefited, no, you benefited. Your people.
All day. All day.
And it's so funny because it's the types of stews and soups that were being served in the big house came from our people.
Right.
So don't sit there and tell me that we didn't come here with knowledge. We came here with more knowledge than you thought. And when we think of commodity, the commodification of the body and mind, that's what we were. It wasn't the cash crops that we had. It was us. We were the cash crops. And in certain cases, you had women who were working the fields more than men. Mm-hmm. The men would do the heavy work, but the strategic work was done by the women. But we knew that already, because you see this with the way that lions raise theirs. So the king of the jungle is a man, but it's the woman who does the hunting. She does the raising of the children, the nurturing. She brings other people together while the man is just out there chilling. So we've seen those examples already, and all of a sudden it ends up here. And then they're like, wow, we can commodify this woman even more. Now we can bring her to our house to help raise our kids. And when she's pregnant, she can breastfeed our children so they have the nutrients that she has, because apparently whatever she's feeding them is making them able to work longer. So you start to see all of this stuff come to manifestation. And it's just like, wow, the Black woman has been commodified and then been vilified. Crack epidemic hits. And I tell people all this, there's no scientific proof to this. Good times and what's happening. Florida Evans and Mabel were two very strong Black women. Examples of when the Black man is gone from the house, mm-hmm. Women are still going to raise their children, go to work, make sure the kids are educated, everybody's clothed. Those are the examples of who you had to take out with the crack epidemic, the Black woman. Mm. And all of this is because of her commodification from the time she was an enslaved woman. She was property, but she was prized property. Hell, George Washington had one of his favorite aides, a woman, and Martha Washington was like, nah, you got to get her up out of here. So she left Philadelphia and she went north. But she was a commodity. Look at Thomas Jefferson. Commodification of Black women is like, it was such a commodity to him. He had to have it. Now you got all these mixed children that are all descendants of Jefferson because the Black woman represented something to them. It was a prize to have one and have many.
Man, hey, listen, out there, if you're not listening, I'm gonna put this out and send it out again, but people, share it with your kids. Share it with your kids, because we share that the kids watch things on YouTube and different things like that. Anyway, share this information with your children, because that's what this is about. That's what peace stands for. Please educate all children equally, but it should be with equity. But I just call it equally because at least we need to get that going on. What drew you to this work as far as the food aspect? And all, what drew you to this?
Honestly, grocery shopping. When you go to the grocery store and you go for rice, rice is the only item in the grocery store that's on 2 aisles.
Okay.
There's the grain aisle,
mm-hmm.
and then there's the international aisle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So my question became with the rice, what's the difference between the two? Why is there one over here and the others are over there? So I started looking into it, and I literally went around the country. Like, I'm in Detroit one day with my wife, and I said, let me show you something. She said, what? I said, what's that? She said, it's rice. I said, let's go down here. What does that say? She said, ethnic. And I said, oh, okay. Not international, ethnic. And I said, what's that? She said, it's rice. I said, why are they separate? Why are we going to two separate places when we can just put all the rice on one aisle? But we have to make sure that it's them. It's always been an us versus them mentality in this country, the haves and the have-nots. We've heard this over and over again. And it was something that made me want to dig deeper, because I wanted to find out, why were these American companies on one aisle, but other companies were not? And it became a situation where you began to see that some of these rice companies go back very far. So you're looking at old money and mixed up into rice. And I wanted to find out more about the people who were growing this rice. And that's what led me to this type of research. And when you see that the development of rice in this country came with other things, like when rice got here, it was like, all right, we're going to grow rice. And then those same West African was like, all right, we're going to make us some okra stew. And so these folks start smelling stuff, and, and then the whole concept of enslaved people were given scraps. Let's think about this. People from West Africa, Africa in general, so we're talking Sahara to all of that, we're talking every aspect of Africa. There's nowhere you can go on a continent and they don't use the entire animal. So how are you giving me scraps? You're giving me something. I'm like, shoot, that's seasoning. And Thanksgiving comes, everybody's eating collard greens. And it's so funny, because I remember Fuzzy Zeller with Tiger Woods, here he comes this fried chicken and collard greens. And it's like, bro, collard greens aren't black. Kale is. Collard greens are a Euro-Asian plant. We had nothing to do with it. We just made it better. So black folk like BASF. We didn't make the food that you eating on Thanksgiving. We just made it better.
Right.
So you look at the incorporation of seasoning and using meat. Like every time you have collard greens, it's either going to be turkey, it's going to be hog, whatever they had, because there's this diversity in knowing how to use the animal as a seasoning. In parts of West Africa, they go shrimping. And for us, shrimping is like, all right, we're going to catch shrimp, we're going to fry it, we're going to have this, that, and the other. But over there, it's like, all right, we're going to dry it. Like if you go to Ghana, they will dry shrimp and grind it up to it so it's a seasoning. The whole shrimp is dried up, ground up, and used as a seasoning. And that's not something new. This is tradition. So you give us something, we know what to do with it. It doesn't matter what, we have an idea that, okay, the loin is going to produce this, something that's darker meat is going to produce more of this because there's more fat that's involved. Like we knew all of this coming into it. So the ideology that we're going to enslave you and we're going to give you these scraps to make you feel less than, we like, okay, we're less than, go ahead and fire up that pot. Let's put that in there, put that in there. Because we know how to utilize it.
Right.
But then you start to, as people are cooking on plantations, big house is like, man, that smells good. Next thing you know, we feeding them the same thing. So that's how you have a lot of these white Southerners that are like, oh man, that's so good. My grandmama's always, no, she hasn't. No, she hasn't. Don't lie. In North Carolina, at the Mordecai plantation, they have one enslaved person, one that they know for a fact has a name, Maddie Curtis. Maddie Curtis was also the cook at the house. So of course, Maddie Curtis is known because I didn't know who's cooking my food. So here you have this one woman who was enslaved. I think Maddie Curtis had 14 children. And upon leaving the plantation, she makes sure that her family has a place to stay. They buy up some land in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I believe a lot of the houses are still in the family's name to this day. But here's this woman who is cooking for you. She's making sure that all your dinner parties are taken care of. And this plantation in particular is one that's of interest to me because President James Monroe came to the Mordecai plantation asking for money because he wanted to start a new country in Africa called Liberia.
Wow.
So, following the trail of James Monroe, who was good friends with Thomas Jefferson, as a matter of fact, their plantations back up to each other in Virginia. So you have Monticello, but then you have James Monroe's Highland, literally your neighbors, they're friends. So now it's like, all right, so this goes back into what I was talking about earlier, where you have uprisings in North and South Carolina, evidence of plantations being taken over, or there's an uprising, and it's disrupting business. So now James Monroe is like, we can't have this. We got to get some of these freed blacks that are helping enslaved blacks escape because it's messing up my profit. So what do? We start Liberia, the only country in Africa, the only country that was started by an American. the capital is Monrovia, named after James Monroe, all because I have to protect my plantation. So it becomes a situation where we look at the movement, migration, and money. If you moving and migrating and you're escaping, you're messing up my money.
Right.
We can't have that. You got to go. So the free blacks is who he wanted gone. And my Liberia, their flag looks like the American flag. Rituals are a lot like ours, but these are all individuals who were taken from different parts of the continent and now brought back here to now say, here's a country. So it's interesting. And all of this because I wanted to find out something about rice.
Wow. When you're dropping so many jewels, man, dropping so many jewels and so many different things I want to get in on. But the one thing you said, several things, and I noticed it when I go to the market, the ethnic aisle and then the other aisle. And I never really thought about why that is. But as you put it in perspective, yeah, that makes absolute sense. So yeah, I need to be shot. And I don't even know if it actually represents the people, although it says ethnic. I mean, is it still commercialized to the point that we're actually profiting off of it? I don't know. I probably need you to give me that research. So if I go to the ethnic aisle, what brand should I buy if I know it's going back to some people that are black and brown? Just keeping it real. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know. Probably none at this point in time. If it's in a major chain, probably none, I would imagine. Go to a place that's a small place that, from somewhere, from the motherland or
if you look at so motherland rice, you only want to find that at true ethnic markets.
Right,
you're not going to find that that's not going to happen. Yeah. But for our brothers and sisters that are in South America, you'll see that a lot. So repackaging, and it'll tell you what country it comes from. But then you have to go do further research, child labor laws, like who are the people that are doing this? Because now it's like, all right, am I really going to pay the money to have some young child out there harvesting rice and getting, so it's conflicting because it's like, I want this rice because it's not this one, but which one is actually better? Like neither one of them at this point, neither one of them are benefiting anybody really, because it all goes back to capitalism.
Yeah.
It all goes back to capitalism.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then I'm going to get my rice from South Carolina because there's some folk down there that's still growing it and they're doing it in a traditional African way. So my closet right now, my cupboard, a lot of Carolina Gold rice because that's what we were brought here to grow.
Carolina Gold, that's the name of it?
That's the name of the particular strain of rice, Carolina Gold. It looks gold. It cooks up very well. And if you cook it the right way, it almost has, it's like a mixture of earthy and chicken together. It's like rice-a-roni without the rice-a-roni.
Got you. Okay.
And the Gullah Geechee people, if you go down to South Carolina, parts of North Carolina, definitely Georgia and the northern tip of Florida, you want to find folk eating that. And you want to have it in red rice. So, I mean, the cuisine that goes along with it is a history lesson itself. Yeah. So that's pretty much the last couple of years what I've been doing, going around the country, speaking about our food and like how it incorporates into the American food identity.
Right. Shout out to all those people. Shout out to all people, but shout out to all those people you just mentioned in those various parts of this country. I was in Charleston about a year ago, South Carolina, and went on a tour, Geechee got a tour, and I forget the brother's name, but he was awesome and amazing, man. I'll just say he was awesome and amazing. I don't know if you've ever done that or whatever, but he was awesome and amazing. He was pulling up on different sites, different like architecture and pointing out things in plain sight that I haven't even thought about. You know what I mean? But that's a whole nother conversation and whatnot. But it was an awesome and amazing tour, man. So parents, why should parents intentionally teach the truth or get the truth about the African diaspora?
It's important. This goes back to an argument I had with somebody last week. I never forget, the individual said, well, why do we have to learn Black history? And I said, because we have to learn yours and ours. So if we're going to be equal and have equity in this, we both should be sharing the same knowledge. And if not for the bringings of my people, your people would have died in a famine. And we have seen it happen before. Mm-hmm. Like they documented European famines. You don't see famines in Africa. Mm-hmm. You don't see that. I mean, you can look hard. I mean, maybe somebody's neighborhood, 10 people, or after the scramble for Africa, where European nations colonized it, and all of a sudden you start seeing little poor Black babies. If you could pay 25 cents a day, you could feed little Ephron for, nah, that would have never happened prior to the scramble for Africa. So it's important to know the things that Africa produced, the people who came from it, and why particular people were taken from certain areas. It's important to tell your kids these things because, I mean, for years we were taught, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492. And it's just like, okay. Then we start growing up and then it's like, oh, Columbus was a rapist. He did this, he did. And it's like, oh my gosh, you had a whole song. It's like he was like the precursor to rap. It's like,
that's worse than that's worse than the negative hip hop. I love hip hop,
exactly.
But that's worse than some of the drill music and stuff because you're poisoning a lot of kids' minds to believe this foolishness and this nonsense.
Exactly. So if we have parents that get involved in the education of the children, first of all, parents are the first educators. Let's start with that because
should be. They are many levels, but what they're teaching is sometimes the issue, right? So
right. And you get some kids that get to school that don't realize their name is Michael because they've been called Pookie from the time they were born to now. And they get in the classroom, what's your name, Pookie? Well, your name is I ain't no Michael. I ain't, so it becomes a situation of teaching your kids at home certain things. Like a lot of this information is literally right in front of you. And I remember somebody telling me years ago, if you want to hide something from somebody Black, put it in a book. Hell, if I didn't open up the middle part of a book one time, I was 230 pages in. And everything I was looking for was right there in those next 3 pages. The rest of the book was fluff. Those 3 pages right in the middle, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. They didn't expect anybody to get through the boring part to get to this part. So being able to go to museums, the gallery back in the day, I don't know what it is now. A lot of us spent a lot of time there growing up, but there's museums in Philly that actually could benefit the knowledge of people. Trips, I'm a big proponent from trips. Like every research trip that I go on, my kids go. So now my kids are understanding of Gullah culture, they're understanding of cultures just around the country, because I want them to see that every area is different and it speaks to the degree of enslavement. When we go to Detroit, my wife is from Detroit, born and raised there, and she didn't realize that there was plantations in Detroit. There were 142 African descendants enslaved in Detroit.
Learn something new every day.
Most of them were enslaved by the guy who founded Detroit or Michigan. One of the two, either way, Detroit, Michigan. He was involved and founded Cadillac.
Wow. And
how did he get his field servants, as he called them? And this is all documented. It's a book called The Dawn of Detroit. He would put his folks onto a wagon that he called his Cadillac to drive them into the middle of the field. Let's fast forward. Now we're the ones driving Cadillacs. The indigenous people who were there were enslaved. And they went to the plantation and said, yo, this is heavy work. We got to go. So we're putting our 2 weeks notice and we're leaving. And they left. But they wouldn't let the same thing happen with the Black enslaved people that were in Detroit. So showing them that and then this was all after enslavement wasn't supposed to extend west. Jefferson gave them a pass because it was for the creation of a larger America.
Right.
So you start to see the difference in enslavement around the nation. In the South, there's different things. Here in Virginia, when you think about enslaved people, the first thing comes to mind is people 1619. And that's fine.
Yeah,
about the years prior. Yeah. It's right over your shoulder. I see it. But what happened before that?
Right.
And you get into this other mix. So we understand that the nation was began by English people. That's the origin of the colonization of this country. Or is it? Because in the 1500s, you had Spaniards that were coming over here and they started to colonize Florida. When they came to Florida, one thing that people don't realize they brought with them are peaches. That's how the peach got to America, by Spaniards, by way of China, by way of the Silk Road. So the Silk Road is what started mixing and mangling all these different recipes. So that's why you see okra and stuff that's in Asia. when it really it starts off in Ethiopia and then makes its way west, where you see the western coast begin to start using okra, but because of the proximity of Ethiopia being closer to Egypt, which was a part of the Silk Road, now you start to see this start to get traded in and out of different places in Asia. So now you start to see the peach, the same situation. These Spaniards, before they went on their exhibitions, they're like, man, these things are good. Load those up on a ship. And you start to throw the pits on the ground, those pits start to germinate. This is the right temperatures to do it. So Florida, by way of that, becomes the first state to have peaches in this country. So what I do in particular is I teach through food, because with all these book bans going on, the one book they can't ban is a cookbook. And cookbooks have a lot of histories. If you think about a cookbook, it always starts off with some of my grandmom's narrative, and grandma used to make this, and Aunt Susie used to make that, and Auntie Dolores added this to it. You see all these different stories. And what are these? Oh, that's right. Those are oral histories that are written down.
It's kind of like, the term that I used earlier today when we had a conversation, going into schools and you're trying to, put things, fill in the gaps, right? So what you just said, that's awesome. That's an awesome idea. That's an awesome idea about using the cookbook, getting the information from there. You gotta have food, you gotta have recipes. So,
but what is it teaching you?
Yeah.
Math, right. Measurements of the ingredients.
All day.
Science, what temperature do I need this to activate the yeast? History, where did this come from and why are we doing this? Geography, what area did this come from? A cookbook is more than just feeding yourself. This is the beginning part of feeding your mind to understand your surroundings.
Heavy, man. I'm looking forward to your book because I know it's coming. I know it's in the works. I know it's in the works. So I'm looking forward to your book or encyclopedia, whatever it is you're putting out. You know what I mean?
It's going to be a digital version, and it'll be launching soon. So I'll keep you posted.
Yeah.
But it's a project called Black Folk in Our Food, where I go into the kitchens around the country of Black folk that are fixing recipes that have been passed down orally and never been written. So the goal is to capture all these recipes and unpack the history around the ingredients. So now we're going back to the commodity. There are certain families that grow things, and it's like they never really thought about why they grew it, but grandma has been growing it since 1912. And it's like, oh, and then her grandma taught her because she was enslaved and on the farm that she was on. That's what, and you start to realize you just took your family back to the plantation and brought them forward by one head of cabbage. Without ever, because when you think about cooking, when we get in the kitchen and start talking, people start to pop up at the table. Now you can talk to grandma all day about anything you want. Oh yeah, when I lived there, it was a man down the street. All of a sudden, when you start cooking, that man now is Ted. So now Ted has a name. Now Ted is in the story. Ted used to always come and bring us the porgies that he used to make, and my mama would fix a pot of grits. So that's how you got the porgies in the house. Where they come from? It was a river down the street, and it was a river that was owned by this white man, but he would go there and he would give the white man this many, he'd bring the rest to us. And then all of a sudden, that man Ted now has a daughter that's your sister. So you start to see all the family come together. It's like, oh, so Ted used porgies to get in the house with Big Mom. I got you. So now we start to fill in the blanks on the family tree. But then you start to realize the migration of family, because with the Black people, we know this to be true. There's a lot of migration going north. When you get to South Philly, around the area that the Institute for Colored Youth, now Cheney University, began, there were more than 80 families that were caterers.
Right.
One of the biggest families were the Bogle family. If you know the Bogle family, you know that they run the Philadelphia Tribune. So this all comes out of the book, The Philadelphia Negro, that was written by brother W.B. Du Bois. And it was a sociological study of that area. But now you have the higher end caterers that are coming from the South and know how to fix that Southern food in Philadelphia. And it's just like, man, they're getting all the attention, but then they start to say, hey, look, I got too much going on. Let me give it to this person over here. So now you start to see the Black family in South Philly start to elevate, because now they all have a hand in the pot, and the bigger ones are feeding the smaller ones, which we don't see much of anymore.
I mean, when you know your history, it should repeat itself at some point in time, at least certain aspects, good, bad, and ugly. But this aspect right here, and we kind of see it now. One thing I will say about some of the young people now, like I went to a couple of private chefs. Shout out to my young boy Brandon, who I played some years ago. Played football for me some years ago. Who's now one of my frat brothers. and he's a chef. And I also went to a couple of like private, like during COVID, a lot of young folks doing their thing, getting, apartments and chefing it up in these apartments and whatnot. And I went to a couple of them and good food, and knowledgeable about the food. So all this information and whatnot, I don't know if they know this information, but at least the entrepreneurial spirit is there, right? At least it's there. And so that's the type of spaces that we need to have more of our young people in, especially when they might not want to go work for somebody else. Working for somebody else is cool. I've done it for most of my life, but I wish the spirit that's out there now was back there when I was coming through, because it was like, you go to school, you get a job. That's what we're talking. Go get a job. It wasn't about the entrepreneurial thing. And what you're talking about is early on entrepreneurship, because you couldn't get a job. We couldn't get the jobs. Had to create the job. Had to create the income. So that's awesome and amazing. What do you think about teachers? What can teachers do? I mean, a lot of times, as we know, teachers are employed in different districts, and now they're banned from doing this study or using this curriculum or using this book and so on and so forth. But for the teacher, and let me say this, there are teachers and then there are educators. A teacher gets their job, teaches the curriculum, and rightfully so, that's all they're really bound to do. But we need more educators. It's going to do that, but then go above and beyond the call of duty, like Dr. Luther K. Asante, wrote a book, Revolutionary Pedagogy, right? And in that book, he talks about, being a revolutionary and using, different means to teach our students, to educate our students and whatnot. So I talk about that in some workshops I do as well. But what do you say about that? What do you think teachers should do based on your research, based on your feelings, based on what you've seen so far, to do what needs to be done?
I give props to my kid's first grade teacher, white woman from South Carolina. And she said, hey, your kids tell me you know how to cook. And I said, well, that's part of what I do. And I explained what I do. She, oh, you should come in and talk to my kids about rice. And I came in and I talked to them about rice. And I pointed out that at the school, inadvertently, there was wild rice growing outside of the school. And I taught them how to identify the rice and how to get the rice out of the hulls, because it literally was just growing randomly. There are certain species of rice in this country that just will grow. And it's always been, the indigenous people had it. They had brown wild rice that they would use, and they would make a stew using hair and different ingredients, herbs and stuff that were growing here. So I get done with that. And the paraprofessional in the class is from London. And I'm like, all right, so good talking to everybody. The teacher says, Mr. Taylor, why don't you tell them and tell her how rice got to this country? And I'm just like, these are first graders. I don't know. I didn't know what to do. And I said, well, rice came here. It was brought here on a boat. And the teacher says, by the who? And I said, by the English. I mean, I wasn't ready. I didn't know if she was ready, but she was ready for it. So we need those teachers in the classroom that are like, all right, put the books down, let's learn. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but you also have to know your audience. I just gave these first graders something that I usually give to 12th graders, if not freshmen in college.
Right.
So now I got my kids walking around. Hey, Dad, that place we stayed before in South Carolina next to the plantation, was rice grown there too? And it's just like, dang. Now I got to explain all this to some 6 and 7 year olds. But a lot of the parents hit me up and were like, hey, how can I teach my kid about history through food? Because, some people look at it as a way of skipping over the ills of enslavement, the beatings, the lynchings, the rape. Those are all things that I don't think we can teach to a first grader, because it's hard to comprehend that.
Right.
However, if I teach the parents that, the parents can disseminate that. So now I have a group of parents that want to learn about this, and I'm like, all because this teacher dared to bring further context to what I was talking about with rice. I do workshops. I do a lot of public speaking on this issue, because it's something that's near and dear to me. Like when I hear about places that have banned books, I'm like, yo, you can't ban a cookbook. One thing you can't do is ban a cookbook. And certain cookbooks give you context in the history. Going back to the Mordecai plantation, you had a white woman from the plantation write a cookbook, but she never cooked at the plantation. She was watching Maddie Curtis cook. and wrote down what Maddie Curtis was cooking and wrote down all the wrong. I said, you know what? I'm gonna try some of these recipes. All wrong ingredients. Maddie Curtis couldn't read, so it was always a pinch of this, a pinch of that. Mix this, taste. All right, that's good. This woman was like 3 tablespoons of salt, and I said diabetes instantly. Diabetes, high blood pressure. She's literally, one of the recipes called, I think for us, a tablespoon of baking powder. That face that you just made is the bitterness that you would get from having that much.
Right.
It's like you're watching this and thinking that you know the measurements, but it's not. So now you get a chance to see how whites in the South learned to cook. They watched over the shoulder and got it wrong. So now the way we did it, trial and error, now they have to do it. And it's interesting because you have these dynamics in cookbooks because people want to tell their family history. At the Mordecai Plantation, we did, and there's a whole epilogue and everything in this cookbook. So you can ban, To Kill a Mockingbird, you can ban 1619, but remember, those same people those books are talking about had to eat. Somebody wrote something down. And then I get into one topic that's near and dear to me is code switching in food. Like you've had a what do you call those things? A low country boil before with the shrimp and all that in it. Well, do you know the real name of it? No. Frogmore stew. Off of the Frogmore stew off the Frog Plantation in St. Helena Island, South Carolina. You had some Black folk that were used to being on the water and knew the flavor of shrimp, again, because they would catch it, dry it, make it a seasoning. They had this corn, throw it in there. You had all these other meats. You bring it to a boil, you throw it out and you just eat. It's a community-based meal, and it's still served that way when you pour it onto a table. If you think about that concept, where else would you have to eat in that, quote, Neanderthalish type of a way if you were an enslaved person? Because you may not have had the utensils, you may not have had the plates, but you had this flat piece of wood that you could pour everything on and eat. You had a pot that was big enough because you had to prepare a meal for the people, not just the people who were in the house. That was a whole separate set of pans. But you had one where you had to feed the enslaved people because they didn't eat in the big house. So you have to think about that in context.
Right.
Were they eating? Somebody had a pot and the knowledge to do this. But when we start talking about capitalism, now you look at the Frogmore stew. How can we change that so we can we'll call it low country boil and make it something that's unique to the geography of the area and completely take the enslavement element out of it. When a lot of people have eaten rice and peas and they'll call it, rice and peas or beans and rice. Oh yeah, I love that all the time. But then when I say hoppage job, what's that? Oh, that's right. It's been code switched to fit and assimilate into your culture. Got it. So once we can get past that and stop just thinking, oh, that's the right term. You have to start thinking about these things and looking deeper into it because it's hidden in plain sight through food. This history is hidden in plain sight through food. The American food identity, hot dogs. Hot dogs go along with what? America's favorite pastime. And neither one of them have real origins here. The hot dog is not an American product. The hot dog is a German product.
Okay.
The wiener dog.
Right, but not worse and all those different things, I guess. Yeah.
But the name of the hot dog is the Dachshund sausage, named after the Dachshund dog, because it's the wiener dog.
Right.
But that comes here, and the first place to have it actually was in New York. And it was sold outside of a baseball stadium, which now is the connection between that sausage and baseball, linking it forever. So you just have to notice. And then like apples, the whole thing, as American as apple pie. Well, the Dutch brought the concept of pie here. The English brought apples here because when they arrived in New England, there were crab apples, but they weren't the apples they were used to eating. They went back, like they were going to Whole Foods, got apples, seeds, and trees, brought them back. So that's why you see a plethora of apple orchards in New England. Some of those are original orchards, have been bearing fruit since 1710.
Man, listen, I don't want to take all the information from the book. You just dropping it. Like all the information from the book, man. I'm looking forward to that, your workshops, all that. But, that right there, is a safer way to have teachers be able to dig deep into these things. And it's almost like a good way of project-based learning. Let's talk about the apple, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, and then talk about, for the mathematics of it, the history of it, all the above, and have the kids doing research. That's awesome and amazing, man. So parents out there, teachers out there, everybody out there, these tips right now that are soon to be Dr. Taylor, are sharing are awesome and amazing. I hope you're like capturing this information and taking it down, because it's awesome and amazing. Listen, you gave us some information already. Any announcements, special projects, other than what you already talked about? Any dates, anything you got going on that you want to share with everybody?
Today I'm going to be talking about, well, not today, I'm sorry, October 18th to the 21st. I have three separate sections on pedagogy and how to teach using oral histories and food coming up in Baltimore, the Oral History Association conference. That's, like I said, it's October 18th to the 21st. Then I'm going to do a speaking series on my research using food on that Saturday, the 21st, from 10 to 12 in Baltimore. And pretty soon, Black Folk in Our Food, which is my personal project, which is going to ultimately become the basis of my dissertation work, is getting ready to launch soon, and it'll be launching at North Carolina A&T. So they're going to host it on their website, and it's a full digital cookbook / history book that tells history from a way that none of us ever think about. Because too often, Black folk, when our folks pass, they take recipes and secrets with them. So this is my way of making sure that doesn't happen anymore. So my goal is to make sure that I capture as many recipes as possible, because within those recipes is a family history. And I want to make sure that those families that give this information, their kids have a reference to go back to find out who the people in their family were and how they came to be.
Got you, man. That's awesome and amazing work. So definitely, once I create the YouTube link for this and send it out, I'm gonna ask you to send me that information. I'm gonna tag that along, so as it gets out there, people can know and people can attend. If people wanted to attend, they just have to pay and attend this event, I guess, sort of in Baltimore.
Yeah, you can pay. You can get like a day pass. It's not going to be much, but
okay. And is it a community center, or a university, or?
It's going to be in the harbor, Baltimore Harbor.
Oh, wow.
So
that was down there recently, nice little restaurant on the side, I guess, or whatever. I forget the name of it, but it was great food, Probably had some Africans in the back. It tastes so good. It tastes so good. That's some of that seafood, man. You know what I mean? Hey, listen, this has been awesome. I've learned so much, and I'm going to go back and look at some of this stuff and take notes myself. And those of you that are out here, definitely do the same thing and do the research. Many of these books that I have, that I accumulated over the years, I hear something, as I said before, going back to the days of Public Enemy and KRS-One early on and whatnot, I would hear them say something, and I said, you know what? Let me go research that. Let me go grab this book. One of the books being How to Eat to Live by Elijah Muhammad. Now, I don't know how scientific, it was, but it definitely, by the things that he said, I lost like 30 pounds, like by following that particular book, and I wanted to lose some weight at the time. I messed it up when I went to McDonald's like late one night, I guess, or whatever, that 30th Street station, and I got hooked back on those chicken nuggets and all that kind of stuff and whatnot. But he did break down some historical connotations inside there. Some could be accurate. Nah, I don't know if I ever read that book, but some of the things you said when they talk about like certain scraps and whatnot, like those things probably don't align per se. But history nonetheless, it was some in there what he believed, and some in there was probably accurate. But again, when you hear something out there, people, you hear something, research it. And you got right now this awesome and amazing oral historian dropping jewels of things that I never knew, that I knew a little bit on the side. And I'm gonna do some more reading myself and research, man. So listen, I appreciate you. Anything else you want to share before we close it out?
Chicken. It's so funny when you said chicken nuggets, because we didn't see chickens until we came here. We ate guinea fowl in Africa. Guinea fowl is higher in protein, leaner than chicken, has a better taste than chicken. It's larger. It's a larger bird, so it's more along the lines of a turkey.
Okay.
But we were
guinea fowl. Guinea fowl.
Guinea fowl.
Can you buy that here? I guess.
So one of my frat brothers actually raises them in North Carolina. Kofa Farms in Durham, North Carolina, and his brother Kamal Bell, he takes young men from inner city Durham and teaches them how to farm traditional African techniques.
Wow.
So they're cultivating crops that we would have grown before we came here and raising guinea fowl.
Again, people, if you were not here tonight, you missed it, but you'll get a chance to see it later. So as I always do, thank you, sir. Brother Andre, who would have known many, many years ago that you turned out to be this? And this is why when I saw what you were doing, and I said, let me get you on here. I should have did it a year ago, but I'm glad I got you in now to kick us off for this year, for Please Educate All Children Equally, Manhood Mondays. We definitely going to circle back again. Keep me abreast of what's going on. Shout out to you. Kudos to you, man, for doing all the work you're doing, man. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank
you for doing this.
Yeah. So listen, that's all I have this evening, people. Don't go anywhere, Andre. We're going to talk in a second when I log it off. But thank you again all for checking us out. Please educate all children equally. Don't forget to check out the website. Got some merch on there. EQ over IQ equals the better you, because you need to have your emotional quotient together before you can worry about anything intellectual, first and foremost. So we talk about that all day, and I got merchandise that speaks to that as well. So thank you for coming out. God bless you all, and good night.